Abusha, thank you so much for joining me in studio today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
What a giant life. What a fantastic way to honor him this weekend with that gorgeous doodle, that Google doodle that we saw, of course.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
And such a fitting way to, you know, to mirror Brahu's life in his own journey to New York, where he also studied at the Manhattan School of Music, and now you're extending the same thing to aspiring South African musicians. Tell me how that came about.
Well, the ELMA Foundation, Music Foundation, and the Manhattan School of Music came to the Hugh Masekela Heritage Foundation with this idea of a scholarship in Hugh's name, or Brahu, as most people call him. The purpose of that scholarship was to extend to people who are previously disadvantaged culturally or financially, economically, to have an opportunity to take 4 years and study a Bachelor of Music degree, not necessarily jazz, but certainly have all those resources available to you.
Yeah, what a fantastic way to give back. Just in terms of logistics and just, you know, the simple or important everyday things, what is covered in the scholarship? The scholarship opens, do applications open in September for the scholarship?
Applications open from September 1st to December 1st. And that is for the year starting August 2020. You apply through, and I've got this memorized, apply.msmnyc.edu/apply. And
so your living costs, your boarding, your obviously tuition.
Your living costs, your boarding costs, your material costs, you'll have a stipend of sorts. And I believe also there are, I think, a couple of times when you will have the opportunity to come home.
Absolutely.
So you won't be stranded in New York.
Well, speaking of being stranded, let's just reflect a bit on Brahu's own journey and his time in New York, because of course you're exiled from home. You are fighting to spread, or you're spreading the word about apartheid and the conditions under which black people are living back home. And yet, I'm sure you miss home, but you cannot go back. Did he ever speak to you and tell you about his time, you know, obviously in London before that, but his time in New York and how studying whilst perhaps battling homesickness, how did that time at the School of Music
He always
impact
told
him?
the story of one day it got to him, and he went to Central Park in New York City and sat down on a bench and just started speaking to himself in all of the home languages. And a police officer walked up to him and like, hey, buddy, are you okay? What's up? What's your story? And so he just explained, you know, he's from South Africa and he's very homesick and, you know, that's, you know. So there were definitely, I suppose, times when it was quite difficult. But certainly by the time I got around, like, which was 1965, there was a relatively substantial South African exile community, I suppose you'd call it. And certainly what I remember from growing up with my uncle is how much time we spent visiting those various South African communities, and that really, somehow or another, he managed to achieve bringing home with him wherever he went. And that includes musically. He was able to translate to a lot of musicians the home sound. And so a lot of his early albums actually sound very much like he never left.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk about the concept of home and how important home was to Brahu. Like you said, he brought it with him, he took it with him in exile and also when he was traveling. But there seemed to be this urgency that he carried throughout his career and through to his last days to fix home or build home or to create a better home once he was back here. What were those conversations with him, perhaps, around what it means to be a South African and an African, in fact?
His aim, goal, journey was really not to fix anything, but to instill in people a desire for their own searching and their own identity. So it wasn't a matter of trying to impose or force something from the outside, but to awaken something from the inside. So that as young Africans, South Africans, but even as young Africans, that we all are proud of our African heritage, whether that means eating pap with your hands, or jollof rice, fufu and pepper soup, that all these things are important. Language, speaking, African artistry, architecture, and that Africans are not, just a bunch of people who sing and dance, although that's a very important part of our lives, but that Africa has a pre-colonial history that is rich with achievement and scientific discovery and scholarship and learning, and for Africans all over, and for the rest of the world to know that these are things that are in us. They're not something that we just see from outside as a superficial thing, but that these are actually our soul.
Absolutely. And you just touched on, you mentioned scholarship, and let's get back to the scholarship, the Hugh Masekela Scholarship, but of course the time that these 6 hopefuls or recipients of the scholarship will spend in New York studying at the Manhattan School of Music. Can we start to unpack and just make it clear to people what the potential for this opportunity is? Because, of course, you're in, I suppose many people call New York the sort of melting pot, of global culture. That's the first thing. The second thing is you add that with the entertainment industry there, with the music industry there, and you're really right in the heart of just a powerful set of variables. Should you use them right, or should you understand them and use them correctly?
Sure. As well as people like Hugh Masekela, the Manhattan School of Music is always also home to somebody like Herbie Hancock. So that's the level of scholarship that you're going to encounter as a student. Yes, there's New York. Yeah. There's also your schoolmates and your classmates, because it is likely that, it's not likely, it is sure that your classmates are going to be very well advanced musicians and will be able to teach, and you will be able to learn from them. And many of those musicians are working musicians, as was Hugh when he arrived at the Manhattan School of Music. So there's an opportunity to, form bands. Two of his longest standing relationships were made at the Manhattan School of Music, which was with Stuart Levine, who became his longtime partner, friend, and producer, and Larry Willis, a great pianist who, at various points in Huey's career, but always there, was Larry, who played piano for him. He met Larry. Larry was an opera student. Yeah. And Huey said, "Hey man, the wig. Come on, guy. You play really good piano, man. Come on, let's do this thing." And Larry Willis is one of the best, one of the greats.
Absolutely. What are you looking for in applicants? What criteria should they meet, essentially?
Not to put too heavy a burden on anybody, but just that Hugh Masekela is the focal point of the scholarship, and both with his legacy and vision of African heritage and African culture, but also that, by the time Huey got to the Manhattan School of Music, he'd been a copyist and musician in King Kong. He'd recorded Jazzy Pistol's verse 1 with Abdullah Ibrahim, Kipi Mokietsi, and Malume Jonas Gwangwa. He'd been the band leader of African Jazz and Variety, Alfred Herbert's Jazz and Variety, which was a very important and significant show in Southern Africa. Dorothy Masuka, Mary Makeba, lots of people were part of that. And he'd also recorded sides with the New York jazz pianist Johnny Mehegan. So the criterion is to love music with all of your heart and all of your soul.
Only that.
If you can express that and you can show that, and certainly a level of virtuosity is expected, but most importantly, that you are that hungry for music.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming in studio, discussing the scholarship, but also just recounting some stories about Hugh's life.
Sure, my
Thank you very much. That was Mabusha Masekela talking about, from the Hugh Masekela Heritage Foundation, talking about the scholarship they have up for offer, opening in September.